So we will keep our announcement short. We do want to mention that on September 20th, the City of Livermore is having a community work day, and we invite all of you to join those of us that want to come. There will be more information coming out in our newsletter. So we're hoping to make this a success and help Livermore keep the beautiful city that it is. So last but not least, I want to mention that there's a donation box in the back on the table. We welcome any donations, either cash or there's a QR code that you can use, because we do have to pay for facilities and have expenses on technologies and et cetera. So anything you can do is appreciated. So now, on to the business of why we're here today. I'd like to first introduce Sherry Spain. Where is Sherry? There's Sherry. We thank her. She's a valuable member of our team, our meeting and planning team, and she has found our speaker today and made all the arrangements for his coming here. So thank you, Sherry. Sherry is now going to introduce our speaker, Professor Stephen Fish. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our speaker today is Professor Stephen Fish, political science professor at UC Berkeley and a leading expert on democracy and authoritarianism. He will be discussing his book, Comeback: Routing Trumpism, Reclaiming the Nation and Restoring Democracy's Edge. Professor Fish makes the case that pro-democracy groups must go on the offense, embracing a bold, high dominance style to defeat Trumpism. His message directly tackles frustration many liberals and progressives have had with the Democratic Party's approach in recent years. Professor Fish, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Sherry. I actually prefer speaking without a microphone, but I think for recording purposes that might not work. If I stood out like this and speak, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. I'm not sure whether I'll use the mic or not. Is it okay with recording if I get away from the mic at least a little bit? Okay. All right. Okay, you guys, let's get started. So, first of all, I'm delighted to be invited here. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to come to your group's meeting. And I think this kind of group, this kind of grassroots organization is absolutely key to moving forward and to actually winning in 2026 and 2028. Let's start then with a puzzle. Why Trump? How did we end up in this nightmare? Once we understand that, we're going to be in a much better position to actually ask, what can we do to remove him and his MAGA minions from power? Okay. So in a nutshell, here's the standard story that I bet most of you believe. And that I believe too, at least mostly until I actually started doing the research for it. And if you, Sherry mentioned my book, Comeback, I think. That book came out in May of last year. If you've read parts of the book, you've read it, or if you're going to read it in the future, you'll see this is the first part of the book. I basically try to dig into this argument about why we got Trump. And there's a standard story out there that you might kind of distill to something like this. So the early post-war decades were a golden era for prosperity and class justice and democracy in the United States. Between about 1945 and 1980, the economy grew briskly, the middle class expanded at pace. Job security and satisfaction were high, and income inequalities and unemployment were low. The Democrats pursued progressive economic policies that differed starkly from what the Republicans offered. We stuck with the working folks, and they stuck with us. But then the golden age began to wane. Ronald Reagan turned away from responsible conservatism and cut taxes for the rich in order to and reduce social spending. The economy began to experience periods of stagnation, and even when it grew, the very top earners captured all the gains. Income inequality escalated relentlessly. The increasingly knowledge-based economy, of course, created a lot of prospects for the well-schooled. But without a higher education, folks started feeling their anxieties mount as their job security ebbed. Satisfaction with work itself ebbed. He used to make the finest steel in the world, but now he's making lattes. He and his wife felt like they were in the middle of the pack and had plenty of room to rise. But now they felt like the American dream was dying for them. And under such pressure, the folks' prejudice grew. The golden age gave way to the gilded age of the 1980s to the present day. Right-wingers like Reagan and Newt Gingrich might have founded the new order, but neoliberalism-friendly Democrats like Bill Clinton and Barack Obama extended it. Enter Trump, the outsider. He blamed the struggles of working-class folks and middle-class folks on foreign exporters, ethnic minorities, immigrants, and out-of-touch liberal elites. People, especially white people from the middle class, those without a college education, found Trump's blame game compelling. The result was Trump's shocking 2016 victory and the rise of authoritarianism ever since. Now, steeped in this standard story, many of us liberals have concluded that the only way back to folks' hearts is by returning to some bygone age when we were much more concerned with the working person's jam. This is the story that so many of us believe. The problem is, it's not true. That's not what's going on. That's not what's happened. I believed it too. The problem is that when you start doing the research, you find something very different. Many of my colleagues believe this story as well. The problem is it's become so ensconced in the way we think and so rarely questioned that we've never really gone back and actually done the research. I tried to do that, and what I found was very little evidence to support it. Since the early 1990s, economic growth in the United States has been robust. Compared to other advanced industrialized countries, we've done extremely well. Median personal income rose by 50% between 1980 and 2017, which isn't bad. In fact, it's quite good by advanced country standards, and it rose fastest during Obama's second term, during those years leading up to Trump's election. Income inequality, as measured by the Gini score, if you studied economics or political science, you know what that is. It's called the coefficient of inequality. It did rise substantially under Reagan, and Bush won during the 1980s and the early 1990s. But after Bill Clinton terminated Reaganism in 1993, it didn't rise anymore. The Gini coefficient is the same today as it was in 1993 when Bush left office. In terms of middle and working class welfare, America's record looks actually very good, including compared to other countries where democracy has not come so seriously under threat. The purported convergence of Democratic and Republican policymakers on neoliberal economics, moreover, simply never happened, either in terms of policies or the rhetoric. What about subjective perceptions of welfare? It might not matter that much what the objective numbers show, but if working class folks in particular have felt their status decline, if they felt their job insecurity rise, their dissatisfaction with their job rise, well, then that might matter, objective conditions aside. But if we examine the data, and the General Social Survey is a great source for this because they test people's subjective perceptions. They go all the way back to the early 1970s with their data, so we can test this standard story actually quite well. And what you see if you look at the data on personal happiness, financial security, perceptions of job security, job satisfaction, and so on, are high and flat lines. You do not see a fall off in people's satisfaction with their job, their perceptions of their own financial security, and so on. And I look particularly at white people who lack a college education, because that's the group that supposedly has cost us democracy by swinging over to Trump. Did social attitudes change in a way that would pave the way for Trump? Have Americans gotten more bigoted over time? Just the opposite. Over the last 3 or 4 decades, Americans have undergone a dramatic liberalization in our attitudes on everything from same-sex marriage to gender equality to race. What's more, as a comparativist who studies democracy around the world, I noticed that in other countries where illiberal demagogues, their versions of Trump, people who threaten democracy, when people like that won elections, economies often at times have been expanding, I found. Inequality had not been rising appreciably. Poverty had been falling. Social attitudes have been liberalizing. When you look at the other countries that have also experienced the rise of their own version of Trump, whether we're talking about Viktor Orban in Hungary, Narendra Modi in India, Czech Republic has had a bout of destructive populism, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte in the Philippines, and so on. What we see is that these demagogues did something different. They cast themselves as indomitable doers of great things who would not be swayed by public opinion and short-term political considerations. Many such leaders also really seized their national flags. They went out of their way to portray themselves as extraordinary guardians of the nation and people who loved the nation more than their political opponents. But these leaders, for the most part, succeeded only where democracy's defenders, where liberals, whether we're talking about classical or progressive liberals, both got squeamish about nationalism and abandoned their flag, and had kind of acquired reputations as petitioners of public opinion rather than as strong leaders. So as I looked at the evidence across the world and I brought it to the United States, I'm not a career-long specialist in American politics. I've studied many other countries. My big topic has been democratization, the loss of democracy, people fighting for their freedom. Now I'm bringing what I know from the rest of the world to the United States, so I see this pattern going on in the world. And it also cuts against the standard story that I just mentioned. So this evidence turned my attention away from structural, economic, and cultural factors and toward political factors, and especially leadership. And as I examined the evidence from the United States and other cases, I came to see that politics is a dominance game and a contest to capture the flag. Politicians who seem to be the strongest leaders and the most ardent patriots usually win. That is the story of the 21st century, and liberals are missing the boat with their constant focus on economic policy and supposed travails of the ever-suffering working-class family. That's not where the action is. And working-class families aren't struggling any more than they used to be at any rate. So the Republicans never forget this. They know exactly what I'm talking about. They know that strength and patriotism, or at least the appearance of strength and patriotism, is what matters. Democrats continue to scurry around hoping to match our policy positions to those of the ever-elusive median voter. The Republicans never try to do this. They haven't done this in 30 years. And this is part of why they keep winning elections, despite the fact that our policies, generally speaking, are more popular than theirs. So let's focus, first of all, on dominance, which is a way or a style of leadership. A few political psychologists have talked about dominance politics and have cast Trump as a kind of dominance politician, but only very few, and the topic rarely comes up in political science. Most political scientists just accept the standard story I gave you, lock, stock, and barrel, and they just kind of tinker with it around the edges. So, to the extent also that many liberals in real-life politics, whether it be ordinary folks or political operatives, to the extent that they even are aware that dominance politics is a thing, they tend to regard it, we liberals tend to regard it as a kind of dirty business that's left to the bad guys, right? But the fact is that dominance politics is neither good nor bad. It's just a tool. It can be used for good or for ill. You can use it to hammer through progressive legislation and change the world for the better, like LBJ did, or you can use it to bend the arc of history toward injustice. which of course is exactly what Trump has done. Dominance politics is not a male thing, even though it might sound like I'm talking about some testosterone-driven phenomenon. Women can engage in it just as effectively as men. We have plenty of evidence of that. So what is dominance politics? Let me break it down a little bit for you, and I do this, of course, in the book. In a nutshell, a high dominance leader is opinion shaping and conflict embracing. And she favors the language of the aggressor, the righteous, and the triumphant. The low dominance leader is opinion taking and conflict averse. And she inclines to the language of the aggressed upon and the endangered. So when I talk about being opinion making, I mean someone who habitually strives to make public opinion. The archetypal high dominance leader crafts a narrative that casts himself and his allies and his forebears as intrepid, successful protagonists. He asks not, what do the people want to hear, but what do I want the people to believe? His message does not shift in sync with public opinion polls or in response to his opponent's reactions. In addition to being reality shaping or opinion shaping, the high dominance leader is conflict embracing, especially when facing aggressive foes. The high dominance leader is happiest on the attack and chafes at playing defense. In fact, she can't stand being on the defense. She seeks to win big, not just avoid loss. It's a different mentality. She accepts risk. She embraces it rather than being risk averse. She makes it all about herself, not about her opponent, except when she's focusing on her opponent to deride him, to ridicule him, to tear him down. She doesn't build up her opponent by treating him or her as some 800-pound gorilla, some monster who we should all be terrified by and offended by. She also recognizes that politics is always an us versus them game. Always. And she decidedly does not shrink from othering her political opponents. The high dominance leader's language also reflects her opinion shaping and conflict embracing orientation. She uses the argot of onslaught and conquest. Embracing provocative parlance, she sometimes uses transgressive language. Above all, everything she does conveys confidence, optimism, and exuberance. So how have we seen dominance politics play out in the United States in recent years? Let's just go back over the last decade or so. In archetypal, exaggerated form that takes absolutely no account of nuance. Let me try to spell it out for you. This has really been the case for the last 10 years, at least until the spring. We'll get to that later in the talk, because I think things are starting to change right now, and for the better. Here in a nutshell is what we've been watching for the last 10 years. The Republicans strive to make opinion. The Democrats read polls and take opinion. When opinion doesn't move their way, the Republicans double down. The Democrats back down. The Republicans pursue even unpopular policies with abandon. Think about abortion. The Democrats often refrain from pursuing even popular policies lest the polls turn against them. The Republicans act as if their policies have more public support than they do. The Democrats act like our policies have less public support than they do. The Republicans tell voters what they think. The Democrats tell voters what they think they want to hear. The Republicans treat even petty wins as conquests. We Democrats treat even our own transformational feats as something that we shouldn't talk about too much, lest we offend those who are still suffering. The Republicans savor conflict. The Democrats find us versus politics distasteful. The Republicans play offense. The Democrats play defense. When the Republicans say something controversial, they push forward. When the Democrats cause a stir, they walk it back. The Republicans embrace risk and they play to win big. The Democrats abhor risk and hope not to lose. The Republicans' messaging tries to stoke their own base. The Democrats' messaging tries not to stoke the Republican base. Right?
Yep.
The Republicans use entertaining, provocative, aggressive language. What does Trump call us? Lame, weak, gutless, pathetic, disloyal, unpatriotic, disgraceful, and disgusting. What do Democrats call Trump? Callous, unfair, ruthless, terrifying, hurtful, heartless, scary, and defensive. The Democrats call the Republicans bullies, and we leave them in charge of the playground. Now, this is in fact a relatively recent phenomenon. The liberals who dominated the political arena in the United States for much of the 20th century, and certainly for that middle third of the 20th century between FDR and LBJ, were paradigmatic high dominance politicians. FDR, JFK, LBJ, MLK, nobody owned those bosses. Can you imagine talking about owning John Kennedy? Boy, they really owned MLK. It seems ridiculous to us, doesn't it? Well, there's a reason for that. The same can be said for the most part of Bill Clinton. These leaders used their dominant skills to enact practically every piece of progressive legislation that we are now fighting a rearguard action to save today. Now, it's hard to measure dominance, but it can be proxied by the concept of strong leadership, or toughness, or decisive leadership. So let's look at some of the numbers. The American National Election Studies does surveys on election years, on presidential election years. And they ask a bunch of very helpful questions. They also include survey items on the Democratic and Republican candidates' traits. One question asks, think about the Democratic/Republican presidential candidate. In your opinion, does the phrase, and here it is, provides strong leadership, describe the candidate extremely well, quite well, not too well, or not well at all? In every election held since 1980, when the survey item was added to the American National Election Studies, in every single election where it's not a tie, where one candidate has the advantage in terms of perceptions of being a strong leader, he won that November, every single time. The surveys also ask several other questions about candidates' traits. One is whether the candidate is knowledgeable. In half the elections, in which one candidate is regarded as more knowledgeable, he wins. And about half, he or she loses. The survey also asks whether candidates really care about people like you. The candidate who is seen as more caring won 5 times and lost 5 times. The Democrats are so good at showing people how much we care. What's not so clear is whether voters give a damn whether we care. Strength, though, never loses. Knowledge and caring lose about half the time. We see the same thing in an abundance of other surveys. Likability, honesty, character, caring about people like us. Trump always loses. But he always wins on perceptions of strength. And that's his superpower. And Democrats don't get it. We keep thinking Americans have gotten so bigoted, he's just playing on their bigotry. Americans are so desperate economically, he's playing on that. It's all nonsense. Bigotry's decline. The American economy's been in very good shape for decades compared to the rest of the world. What the Democrats lack is not compelling policies. Everybody likes our policies. It's the perceptions of strong leaders. Democrats still think that voters make their decisions based on our issue stances, our qualifications for office, how much we express our caring, our commitment to fairness. Trump knows better, which is why he keeps winning. Even though voters, of course, typically prefer our policies, whether you're talking about teaching about slavery in the schools, gun control, abortion, taxation. Most voters agree with us, but we keep losing elections. So let's put aside dominance for a second. The second way that democracy's opponents, and this is true around the world as well as here, have gained the upper hand is by embracing nationalism. Politics isn't just a dominance competition, it is also a competition to capture the flag. And for centuries, strong liberal leaders relentlessly tethered the defense of democracy and the pursuit of justice to the whole nation's customs, welfare, and faith. The Democrats did not win 7 of 9 presidential elections and control 16 of 18 Congresses during the middle third of the 20th century just by convincing voters that they were compassionate progressives. FDR, Mary Bethune, Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson, and Martin Luther King, to name a few, were also unapologetic nationalists. They relied on a vigorous rhetoric of national honor and greatness to justify and build support for Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, federal aid to public education, voting rights, civil rights, liberal immigration policy, environmental protection, consumer protection, and progressive taxation. And the list, of course, goes on and on. But they always wrapped their message in the flag. For John Kennedy, we didn't want to just help the poor. For John Kennedy, we didn't want to just treat African Americans like human beings because it was morally the right thing to do, although he made that case as well. But he constantly said, do we want to show the world this face, the greatest country in the world? Look at his speech on civil rights that he gave just after George Wallace blocked the doors to schools in Alabama to black children. He said, how can we show the world the face of the greatest country where a tenth of the population does not even enjoy the most basic rights to citizenship? We are going to show the world what democracy is made of and what America is made of, and this is not the way to do it. The messaging of leaders like Kennedy celebrated the nation's triumphs under liberal leadership and offered a vision of a still greater age to come. They appealed to the heart, not just to the head, not just our economic interest, which is not what we get from liberal leaders today. This was no less true of the great 19th century progressives, Cassius Clay, Frederick Douglass, these breakers of slavery and healers of the nation after the Civil War. They made liberal democracy patriotic and patriotism liberal and democratic. It's harder to say that about liberal leaders today. Their squeamishness about nationalism and failure to embed identity groups in an imposing, inspiring national narrative has left Trump's narrow nativist fable as really the main ones Americans hear. We know what Trump's story is. The good, decent people of the heartland are being screwed by coastal elites and ethnic minorities and foreign exporters, while liberal elites stand aside and do nothing. I'm paraphrasing David Brooks. That's their story. What's our story? We don't have one. We'll get to this. In the absence of a compelling, inclusive, I'll call it a national democratic narrative, ethno-nationalists like Trump, who identify the nation with a particular ethnic group or religious group while treating everybody else as second-class citizens, really end up convincing a lot of Americans that they are the real patriots. So, look, if the operatives who have shaped Democratic Party messaging for the past decade got their twitchy noses out of this week's focus group data and headed to the bars and had some actual conversations with actual people, including people who vote for Trump, including people whose parents or who themselves actually used to vote for the Democrats, bellied up to the bar and talked to them, we might be in much better shape. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen too often. I discovered this is a great place to do research, including in red zones, including in red states. My wife Layla and I just got back from 2 months in Florida. It was great. Wonderful experience. We spent a lot of time hanging out in restaurants and bars and cafes and mixing it up with the folks, overhearing the conversations. This is really, really important. And if the standard story that we talked about earlier were true, you'd hear something like this from the folks as you bellied up to the bar, talking about politics with them. You know, back in the day, the Democrats used to stick with my trade union and stick with our working class and our wages, and used to really not be okay with billionaire tax cheats, but that's all changed now. That's why we're voting for the Republicans. Have you ever heard that from a working class person? No. What you hear is that the Democrats are socialists, weak patriots, and wimps who think people like them are rubes and bigots. Let's take a look at the November election in light of what I've talked about so far. So the campaign and the election's outcome provide proof of concept for everything we've been talking about. I published Come Back in the spring, about 6-8 months before the election, And I was hoping it might get into the campaign, maybe somebody would read it, and it'd make a little bit of a difference. And my ego actually saw signs that that might have been true for a while, but then unfortunately, either my ego was fooling me or somebody else got the campaign's ear, and they changed. But at any rate, I do feel like this argument was strongly vindicated by what we saw last year. So in the half year or so before Biden withdrew from the race, we all remember he'd become the kind of paradigm of the low dominance politician. His campaign relied on vapid ads on Trump's supposed threat to affordable prescription drugs, and his incessant claims that Trump was a liar. He also relentlessly tried to turn the campaign into a referendum on his opponent. At one point, he even said, well, I'm not much, I know, but you got to have somebody to vote for to beat somebody else. That was in a speech to donors. Right? You talk about stoking fury on the part of the donors in favor of your cause, right? That'll really do it. That's what Biden had been reduced to. And I think part of it we now know was really due to his physical and perhaps cognitive infirmity. So unsurprisingly, even while Biden did a terrific job on policy, and don't let anybody tell you Biden wasn't a terrific president in terms of policy. He was magnificent, but he didn't get any credit for it, right? It was all about messaging. He did everything right. The economy boomed, but he couldn't talk about it, and that was the problem. So, unsurprisingly then, Trump was running ahead of Biden in the polls by a pretty hefty margin, 5-6 points, at the time of Biden's disastrous debate performance on June 27th with Trump. So that was even before he had the debate, and then of course he had to drop out. And then on July 21st, you guys remember that day? That's the date that Biden withdrew and Harris stepped up. Do you remember all the doubts about Harris? Remember Jim Cargill calling for a national convention where everybody get together and somehow choose an open DNC, so we could get this kind of Harris person aside without looking like sexist or racist? That lasted about 2 days. Do you remember? She stepped out like a boss. Remember how fun that was? Damn. That was incredible. What changed? The answer is that from the moment she stepped out, she was the boss. She projected the spirit of ebullient optimism and promised victory and no retreat. Remember her early rallies? They're just boisterous celebrations of everything we believe in. They drew immense crowds. Remember how Trump reacted? He melted down. It was the first time somebody was drawing more heat than he was. It's not the first time somebody's beating him in the dominance game. He whined about the Democrats hitting him with a bait and switch. You remember that? This is no fair. I was going to beat Biden, now they put this other candidate up. I didn't prepare for this. You talk about low dominance whining. No wonder the poor dear was so distraught. I mean, first somebody was actually overmatching his dominance advantage for the first time. During the early stage of her campaign, Harris did not try to make the election a referendum on Trump. To the extent she dealt with Trump at all, she left behind treating him as this monster who we should all be terrified and offended by. Instead, she and her vice presidential running mate, Tim Walz, treated Trump like an impetuous toddler in need of a timeout. Leveraging her career as a public prosecutor, she aggressively embraced a prosecutor versus felon frame. Remember that? Remember those early weeks of her campaign? She kept to every speech was like, I put people like Trump behind bars before I came into politics. I think I'm going to enjoy this job. At the DNC in August, you remember that? It was a raucous, star-spangled, patriotic Harris coronation. Some of the party's highest dominance assets, Wes Moore, J.B. Pritzker, Andy Beshear, Jasmine Crockett, they all made primetime speeches and got me very excited. Harris's acceptance speech was a hard-edged series of promises and of commitment to the defense of the United States and its allies in the face of challenges from our foreign enemies. Countries who, she reminded us, also were led by people who were Trump's best foreign friends. Then, remember September 10th, the debate? The Harris-Trump debate? She beat Trump so badly that he referred to even consider a second debate. Harris cast Trump not as terrifying not as an imperious liar, but as insecure, tiresome, and small. Playing on Trump's crowd size obsession, as you probably recall, she invited viewers to attend Trump rallies, where she said people leave early because they're so bored. A stammering Trump responded, remember his response to the debate, to the crowd size question? We have the biggest, I'll quote him here, we have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. And then he launched into, do you remember? His tales of immigrants eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio. Remember that? The guy was a little flustered. And rather than just calling Trump a friend of dictators, Harris got deliciously derisive. She mentioned it is well known that he exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un. And she pointed out that if Donald Trump were president, Putin would be in Kiev right now. Turning to Trump, she said America's enemies were rooting for him since, and I quote her, they can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. While Trump was talking, do you remember it? Harris alternated between looking at him with bemusement and then kind of looking away with this breezy grin as if to avoid bursting out laughing. Remember that? I watched the whole debate with the sound down. No sound, just to watch their faces. Absolutely incredible. You can watch her own him even with the sound down. Trump, for his own part, never looked at Harris. Do you remember that? He just gripped the podium and he stared straight ahead. He did not want to glance at the woman who was humiliating. So, Harris' campaign strategy was working. Not only did she pull ahead of Trump in the polls, but a host of polls showed that most voters expected her to win. And it turns out that a better predictor of who's going to win an election months in advance than what the polls say about people's preferences is who they think is going to win. And by a large margin, voters expected Harris to win back in September. But then after roughly 7 weeks of successful campaigning that left Harris rising and Trump sputtering, Harris lost her mojo. Maybe you can remember the vibe shift. Maybe you can remember this. The reason was that fretting, calculating, and obsessing over polling data and dodging risk supplanted moxie and exuberance in Harris's campaign. In other words, the operatives got a hold of her campaign. Once Harris started granting interviews after the debate, she dodged and deflected. She completely forewent the opportunity to define herself and left herself open to suspicions that she lacked courage of her convictions. Her answers were so scripted, so banal, and so repetitive, they scarcely even merited news coverage. Her 60 Minutes interview in early October was typical of her post-mid-September behavior. Bill Whitaker asked her, do you remember the interview? Bill Whitaker asked her how millions and millions of Americans could support a man that she called a racist. She evaded the question. So Whitaker asked it again. She dodged again, offering something about Trump being divisive and Americans wanting a uniter, not a divider. She could have given an answer that would blunt perceptions of liberal condescension toward Trump voters, seize the flag, earn herself a reputation as a bold truth teller, and crush Trump's dominance game. Something like this. Of course Trump is a racist and therefore an enemy of the United States. But most of those who voted for him aren't racists. What they loved about him is how he owns the libs. But nobody owns this lib. No wonder he chickened out of a second debate. Did you watch me own him in the first one? And why are we even talking about Trump? Biden smoked him 4 years ago, and I'm going to smoke him again in 4 weeks. Isn't this what we wanted to hear? Had she said it, she would have won this election. Had that been the tenor of her rhetoric, she would have won the election. I have no doubt about it. We can't prove it, but this is certainly my hunch. Instead, she devoted herself to avoiding risk, avoiding provocation. That became the name of her campaign's game. Except for her Fox News appearance, she would not even grant interviews to hosts who might challenge her and get her out of her comfort zone. Nowhere was this problem more apparent than in her complete non-response to Trump's play for young men and his appearances on these so-called manosphere podcasts. She could have, and I advised her campaign at the time, not that they were listening to me, I just said it in some interviews, to basically, call Trump's appearances on the most distasteful of these manosphere podcasters his outreach to incels tour, while also going on less obviously, misogynist podcasters, mainstream people like Rogan or Lex Friedman. She did nothing of the sort. She did neither one. Instead, she declined invitations. Trump took them. If you look back at things Rogan has said over Trump over the years, Rogan has called Trump everything. He said the most derisive things about Trump imaginable. But the fact is, when he invited Trump to Austin to do a podcast with him, Trump jumped at the opportunity, got on the airplane, no preconditions, sat down with Rogan in 3 hours. That podcast got 37 million views in 48 hours. He also went on Lex Friedman's podcast. Lex Friedman brings science to the masses, among other things. He's a very nice guy. He's very polite with his interviewees, everything. Trump jumped on a plane, met with him, gave him an hour. Harris refused to go on his podcast. Why did Harris refuse to go on Joe Rogan? Because she insisted that Rogan not ask questions on whole areas. And so his team said, we can't do this. We have to have an open-ended debate, an open-ended conversation. She said no. She was afraid he would ask embarrassing questions, and so she just didn't go on. Her top podcast appearance was on Call Her Daddy, which never even cracked 1 million YouTube views. So by mid-October, the fruits of such exquisite risk aversity were coming into focus. Trump had recovered his footing and was again bulldozing the Democrats. Do you remember? Do you remember this by early October? By that time, it was abundantly clear that the data-drunk, so careful message curators who had already run Biden's campaign into the ground had asserted themselves in Harris's messaging. Trump hammered at a handful of themes, predominantly the so-called crisis at the border, Harris's earlier statements advocating decriminalization of border crossings, and Harris's purported commitment to blurring the distinction between the genders. As the airwaves in swing states filled with Trump's ad skewering Harris's supposed wokeness by intoning, Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you. What happened after that? What was her response? She didn't respond. Not anything derisive and funny against Trump. Nothing to defend herself, nothing. Instead, sitting on gargantuan piles of absolutely vacuous data, the operatives turned the campaign's ad effort into a scatter of minutely targeted, alarm-sounding, and pandering, along with endless, mind-numbing invocations of Harris's middle-class roots and her middle-class sympathies. How many people here consider yourselves middle class? Upper middle class is good too. I know there's a lot of upper middle class folks around here. Okay. How many people really get stoked? Really are proud of the fact that you're middle class? 1, 2, 3. Good for you guys. All right? This is not a source of identity that gets most of our blood, our blood pumping. And yet Harris thought that if she just talked enough about her middle class origins, then we'd all realize that she was for us. Never mind the fact that she's married to a very rich man and actually lives high on the hog now. She came from a middle class family, and of course that was going to make all the difference to us. Harris never even began to formulate an effective response to Trump's assaults on Harris for having advocated the decriminalization of border crossings. The lines that her campaign operatives fed Harris were both so obviously the product of focus group testing and so inappropriate for her to be uttering as to be funny. When she was queried on immigration, she ever intoned, "Our immigration system is broken." Well, coming from the sitting vice president, who with the president had been presiding over immigration policy for the better part of the last 4 years, that led to a lot of head scratching. I think even a lot of people burst out laughing. But we know that that line would have, gotten a hearty thumbs up in the focus groups. Everybody loves lines like that. So that's what she said. Harris trotted out that line practically every time she was pressed on immigration. She did so in the 60 Minutes interview in early October that I mentioned. And then when pressed, she noted that Biden had recently signed an executive order to fix the border problem that congressional Republicans had rejected. When she was gently prodded by Bill Whitaker, the interviewer, again, and he said, well, there was a surge of undocumented border crossings early in the Biden presidency. And he said, well, I know you guys kind of helped fix it, but might you have been a little bit too slow? Harris said the problem predated Biden, and it was Congress's job to act. Her approach, of course, throughout the campaign just led to more embarrassing questions rather than getting the monkey off her back. To many voters, and not just Republicans, it also created an impression of cravenness. Meanwhile, Trump kept pounding away at his BS about the crisis of the border, and he dominated news coverage as he did. And his poisonous story about immigrants poisoning the blood of our country took hold. As usual, he focused on making opinion rather than just reacting to polls, and he did remake opinion. Americans are generally a very pro-immigrant people. You look at the Gallup surveys, positive views toward immigration tanked during the last couple of years in Biden's presidency, and it wasn't because the border crisis was so severe. It was because Trump kept trying to form our opinions, and he did. On immigration, think about what Harris could have said. You live and learn. Joe and I did. We wanted to do our homework and get this thing right, and we weren't going to do it Trump's way, by separating tear-soaked toddlers from their parents and putting them in cages. Were we a little slow? We were. We were. And there was a bit of a problem for a while. But then after we did our homework, we did the right thing. Now illegal border crossings are lower than they were during the Trump presidency. Next question. Did we hear anything like that from her? No. Why not answer Trump's demagoguery with such a truthful, forceful mea culpa and demonstrate a capacity for learning and then declare victory? Too risky for Harris. She also could have defended immigration by drawing on Frederick Douglass or Presidents Johnson or Reagan. She could have told a stirring story of a nation whose cultural and economic preeminence in the world rests on continuous minting of Americans from all corners of the earth. She could have echoed Reagan by proclaiming, and I quote him, "If we ever close the door to new Americans, our leadership of the world would soon be lost." She could have joined him by proclaiming, as Reagan did in his final words in office, that new Americans, and I quote, "understand in a special way how glorious it is to be an American." They renew our pride and gratitude in the United States of America, the greatest, freest nation in the world, the last best hope of man on earth. Apparently that was too risky. What would progressive voters thought of all that flag waving and invoking Reagan anyway? Her messaging on the economy was similarly lame. It left voters vulnerable to Trump's lies about the superiority of his economy. It also stoked suspicions about Harris's lack of audacity and her ability to add anything to what Biden had already done. Do you remember practically every time the economy rose in Harris's interviews and public statements during that second half of her campaign? She led by expressing sympathy for these supposedly terribly straightened middle-class voters, and then she played Santa Claus. I'll give you a $50,000 tax break for starters of a new business, those who are starting their first new business, a $25,000 break for down payment assistance for new home buyers, and a $6,000 tax break for new people with newborns. This is what pandering looks like, and it felt to voters like pandering. What's more, if you add up all these policies, the chances of any one American actually being able to avail themselves of any of these policies in any given year are like 1 or 2%. And for fear of offending all those poor middle-class people who were supposedly hurting so badly under her and Biden, when Harris was asked, "Do you think people are better off than 4 years ago?" she refused to answer the question. Instead, she could have said something like this: "You're goddamn right, you're better off than 4 years ago." Back then, unemployment was 15%, higher than during the Great Depression. Under me and Biden, it's lower than it's been since the 1960s. COVID and COVID alone pushed inflation up, but Biden and I hammered it back down to under 3%. That's the Fed's target. Our economy is leaving other rich countries in the dust. It's growing faster than all of them. America is the innovation capital of the world. Real wages have been rising for a year and a half running. New business startups and corporate profits are surging. The Dow is setting records. When Trump left office, the Dow was 31,000. Today, it's 42,000. Oh, and by the way, the budget deficit has half of what it was when Trump left office 4 years ago. Dream on Cheeto. But you ain't seen nothing yet. We're going to make Biden's good economy look like Herbert Hoover's. No more hunger in the greatest country in the world, in the richest country in the world. Watch for the Dow to break 50,000. Why the hell not? We heard nothing of the sort from Harris. Her approach to Trump shifted during the second half of her campaign as well. The take no prisoners, prosecutors versus felon area seemed to fade. It's hard to determine why, but notably Harris did come in for a raft of criticism from the left for, you guessed it, unfairly stigmatizing felons. Perhaps worst of all, the dismissiveness and the derision and the entertaining ridicule that had grabbed headlines and flustered Trump during the first half of her campaign gave way to defensive, low dominance messaging and that low dominance habit of trying to make the campaign about your opponent rather than yourself. So she went back to what the Democrats have been doing ever since Hillary Clinton, which is amplifying Trump's every outrageous statement and then indignantly calling on everybody to be good and offended. In the closing weeks of the campaign, this particular revision to form took on an almost pathetic air. As Trump fed the Democrats the bait, and the Democrats kept taking it. He just kept ratcheting up the outrage, and the Democrats would jump on it. Did you hear what he said? Did you hear that he called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage? Okay, he didn't, but some comedian at some rally gave did. What do you think about that, Hispanics? She whisked Jennifer Lopez to her side. Remember that? We're going to win the whole Hispanic vote in the United States by amplifying the fact that some comedian at some Trump rally had called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. After Trump said, and I quote him, "I'm going to do it whether women like it or not. I'm going to protect women," Harris spent the precious last days of her campaign highlighting Trump's remark and trying to stoke voters' umbrage over his sexism. Same old, same old. Trump flicks the laser pointer and the Democrats play the cats. Tim Walz, who was brought on as a running mate, as you recall, on the strength of his barbed references to Trump and his party as creepy and weird, turned out to be a one-trick pony who had nothing else to say. As a result, journalists focused on what? On Walz's past misstatements. Were you really in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square protests in 19? Okay, no, I admit I wasn't. You said you implied that you served in the Iraq War and you didn't serve in the Iraq War. Okay, yeah, I did. Did your wife really use in vitro fertilization with that? Okay, no. And so rather than responding with conversation changing, really hard barbs, entertaining barbs against Trump and Vance, rather than escalate his earlier ridicule, he ended up spending all his times in interviews apologizing for past misstatements and chiding himself for being a knucklehead with a bad memory. In early March of this year, having been sent back to St. Paul by voters 4 months earlier, and now witnessing the rapid-fire demolition of democracy by the men who beat him, Walz declared of his and Harris's campaign, "We shouldn't have been playing this thing so safe." You think? Now let's have a look at what voters thought when they went to the polls. we can examine the data from the AP Norg survey conducted at the time of the election. Survey asked 4 questions about the candidate's personal traits. First question was whether the candidate was honest and trustworthy. The gap between positive and negative scores on that item advantaged Trump by 10 points. Second question is whether the candidates had the mental capacity to serve effectively as president. Harris won that one by 10 points too. Third question, do the candidates have, quote, the moral character to be president? Advantage Harris, 17 points. One more question. Is the candidate a strong leader? Trump, plus 19. Harris won all the other metrics, and all the metrics Democrats think are what win elections. But what the polls showed is that this dominance advantage that Harris had established early in her campaign had vanished. And that proved to be decisive. Trump knows exactly what he's doing. As you can see, my explanation for the election's outcome, like my explanation for how we got Trump to begin with, is all about leadership and messaging. No other explanation will do. It wasn't the economy, stupid. The economy was roaring. It could not have been in better shape than at the time of the election. The problem was that Harris's messaging on the economy was really weak. Nor did the Democrats lose middle and working class voters by pursuing neoliberal policies that neglected their interests. Biden enacted a slew of progressive legislation, including the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Chips and Science Act, that aimed to and did pump big bucks into middle and working class pockets, especially in red states. These measures and others arguably amounted to the greatest crush of progressive legislation we have seen on the economy since Lyndon Johnson. And they didn't move the needle 1 degree for the Democrats. Nor was Trump, to say the least, a popular, unbeatable opponent. During his first term, he suffered from the lowest average approval ratings of any president on record. And he left office with a 34% approval rating, which is lower than the 40% that Biden left with in January. So did Biden withdraw from the race too late? Another kind of thing that we all, a lot of people believe. Well, I don't know. If the election would have been held in mid-September, Harris would have won after 7 weeks. Is 14, 15 weeks too little? Maybe. There's no way of telling. But I wouldn't blame it on that. Do sexism and racism account for Harris's defeat? Well, the gender gap was actually smaller in 2024 than it was in 2020. Harris experienced more extensive losses among women than among men. In terms of ethnic demographics, Trump won exclusively on a rise in support among non-white Americans. Proportionally speaking, Harris beat Biden's performance by a little bit among white voters. Again, that's adjusting for the overall totals. But she lost 2 points among black voters. She lost 13 points among Asian voters, and 27 points relative to Biden among Hispanics. Hard, in my opinion, to look at these numbers and say, oh, it was all about racism or sexism. The good news, if my assessment is on target, is that we Democrats hold the key to our own future and democracy's future. It's in our hands. Our fate does not rest on the price of eggs. It does not rest on what Trump says or does. It does not rest on hopes that bigotry will abate. What it does depend on is our actually learning from the past. It doesn't depend on uniting around the issues. See that James Carville op-ed in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago? The Democrats have to unite around one message, because if we're not all united, then we're screwed in the midterms. And he wants to unite around repealing Trump's big, beautiful bill. Well, first, the party doesn't have to be united around anything. The Democrats aren't going to all agree on trans athletes or government regulation, and we don't have to. What matters is that our leaders fire up Democrats, cow Republicans, and impress the unaffiliated by showing that they are mighty fighters and defenders of America who have the courage of their convictions and don't give a rat's ass about what anybody else thinks. Now, what do we see going on in politics right now? I sense a vibe shift.
Yeah.
Just since March or maybe April, last 3-4 months, I'm feeling it. It's a dominant shift. I think we Democrats have tried and exhausted every brand of weakness, every brand of lameness, every way of refusing to acknowledge that politics is an us versus them game. We may have exhausted every hope that we will triumph if only we express still more fervently our empathy for the supposedly suffering middle class and those struggling working families, as we so condescendingly love to call them. We may be seeing a shift toward higher dominance messaging on the part of many Democratic leaders. It's driven by the lessons of the past. It's driven by exhaustion of everything that comes naturally to us, none of which worked, and all of which gave us Trump, as well as by grassroots demand for real leadership. So think about it. The reason Bernie Sanders and AOC are drawing immense crowds, even in small cities in red states, in the remarkable Fighting Oligarchy tour, isn't because Americans are so thrilled with their socialist agenda. Even most Democrats don't want what they're selling in terms of policy. And think about it, we're so mesmerized by Cory Booker's record-breaking marathon speech, but it had little to do with what he said. What these leaders are doing to inspiring us, what they're doing that inspires us is that their fury and indomitability and taste for political combat are obviously so high. If the Democrats ever have the hope of routing Trumpism, we're going to have to seek similarly high dominance figures to lead the party and become its public face. This is our main goal. This is our big challenge. Grassroots organizations are important, it's true, but the biggest thing we can do is to actually engage in really creative candidate selection. That is, pick candidates we think will be winners, and I've tried to convince you and will continue to try to convince you that what we need is high dominance patriots, and put them forward. We do have high dominance figures. Adam Schiff, Ruben Gallego in the Senate, Jasmine Crockett and Pat Ryan in the House, Josh Shapiro, Andy Beshear, for examples. I have a whole chapter in Comeback about Crockett, who was showing what exuberant Republican punking messaging sounds like. Jeremy Raskin adopted the mantra, a rally day keeps the fascists away. And for the first few months of Trump's presidency, he was at a street rally on average every 2 days. He also delights in traveling the country and taking the podium in town halls in red districts where Republican members of Congress aren't showing up for fear of facing the wrath of the constituents. Raskin finds these, he just goes and he just shows up and takes the podium instead of, Congressman GOP. Some high dominance leaders are moderates and others are hardcore progressives. They vary very much in their styles, from Jasmine Crockett's kind of sass and hot sauce to Schiff's much more scholarly demeanor. But they're united by their uncompromising democratic passions, their commitments to shaping opinion rather than just looking at polls and telling voters what they think we want to hear. They're united by their willingness to ruffle feathers, their understanding that playing defense is for losers, and their taste for MAGA blood. Other figures will arise as well. Some of them whose names we do not know. And it's our job, above all, to bring them forth and embrace them. It's past time for us liberals to recognize that there is nothing illiberal about fierce leadership and avid followership. Our fears that the strong gods of heroism and charisma, ardent partisanship and nationalism and sacrifice lead only to authoritarian danger have rendered liberalism, indeed democracy itself, insipid to a large portion of humanity, including in the United States. By instead embracing the bloodless spirits of competence, technical expertise, norm following, relativism, and self-interest, democracy's defenders have inadvertently paved the way for demagogues who mesmerize their followers with perverted notions of power and personal strength and national greatness. Re-enchanting democracy is necessary to save it. And that can only be done by bold Democrats who arm themselves with stirring national narratives that glorify what I call the 4 pillars of Americanism. Democracy, openness to new arrivals and minting new Americans, economic freedom, and ferocious commitment to our own national security and the security of our democratic allies. Among the Democrats who I think at the moment at least are most in tune with the necessity of high dominance messaging and propounding a national democratic narrative, who's the best right now?
Newsom.
Newsom.
Yeah.
Newsom.
Yeah.
And it's only been the last couple months.
Yeah.
He told right-leaning Manosphere podcaster Sean Ryan last month, it's narrative, it's not the fact. It's who can dominate the conversation. Trump is a master at this. That wasn't a passing remark as far as I could tell. That was an epiphany. It was an expression of something that he perhaps incompletely understood in the past, but now he gets it. And he is on a tear to dominate the conversation. He's accepting every invitation from every right-leaning Manosphere podcaster, and he tells their audiences that most of what Trump tells them is bullshit, and that one liberal leader at least has the guts to say it to their faces in the media they watch. His social media operation is a wicked MAGA trolling machine. I cannot get enough of it. He hits back at every attack with exuberant aggression rather than the Democrats' usual cries of umbrage and pain. When Trump threatened to arrest him during the anti-deportation demonstrations in Los Angeles, Newsom replied, "Come arrest me. Just get it over with, tough guy. You know where you can find me." Notably, Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, quickly issued a statement clarifying that Trump's threat to arrest Newsom had been taken out of context. Rather than join the ranks of cynical liberal elites who claim that the folks don't really care about democracy anyway, just talk about the kitchen table issues, Newsom constantly sounds the alarm, spells out the stakes, and promises to go to war to save free government. The moment the Texas Republicans, egged on by Trump, started their move to gerrymander Texas, Newsom, of course, jumped on with the plan that we're all familiar with, his plan to gerrymander California. Although in a democratic way, temporarily. We're only going to do this as a deterrent against Texas, and only as many districts as they're going to do. And then we're going to go back to the old plan. That's how a Democrat fights fire with fire. Whether he's slapping a 9-figure lawsuit on Fox News for false reporting on his own actions, calling Stephen Miller a fascist cuck, trolling Trump mercilessly on the Epstein case, or unleashing these profanity-laden tirades on conservative podcasts, Newsom is drawing Republican blood. He's remoralizing demoralized Democrats, and he's showing Americans a liberal leader who is always on the offensive and is having the time of his political life giving offense. That's for you, Governor, in case you're watching. Newsom also appears to be developing his own national democratic story, and I love this. He's not there yet, but I can see the beginnings of it. And if he developed it and communicated it effectively, it could overmatch Trump's dismal, anti-democratic, nativist story and seize the flag for MAGA. That would be astounding, wouldn't it? Democracy, of course, is the first pillar of Americanism, as I mentioned. And at a time when many embittered Democrats have decided that most folks don't care about democracy, after all they voted for Trump, Newsom is spelling out Republican plans to rig the midterms and suppress voting using coercive tactics. He's explaining why eliminating auditing capacity of inspectors general endangers what Americans hold dear. He's sounding the alarm, spelling out the stakes, and going to war to save democracy, the founding pillar of Americanism. He's also going to war to save the second pillar of Americanism, which is openness to new arrivals. Did you guys see his minute-long viral video about immigration? You gotta see it. He crows about our state's innovation dominance. We're the most innovative state, we're the most innovative region of the whole world, we dominate the world because we're the best, because we're all about innovation. And by the way, the world's now the world's fourth largest economy. And why is that, he says? He says it's because 27% of Californians are foreign born. And I quote him here, it's because of the immigrants. It's because people from all around the world want to come and live their lives out loud in California, the most diverse state and the world's most diverse democracy. End of quote. He raves about the entrepreneurial spirit that immigrants bring, not only to California, but to Wall Street boardrooms and boardrooms around the country. And he exults, and I quote him again, that's what made America great. So a boasting that California is over a quarter foreign born, and will all the diversity talk play in 2028, 2026? A lot of fretting Democratic Party operatives would say not. Didn't Trump turn Americans against immigration and clobber Harris with the issue? Newsom doesn't care, as far as I can tell. He seems determined to crush Trump's nativist narrative and remake public consciousness on immigration. His story conjures these gripping narratives we heard from Ronald Reagan and Lyndon Johnson about how minting new Americans from all corners of the earth is the indispensable guarantor of our country's greatness. Newsom's effort to mold public opinion by telling voters his own truths, rather than just reading polls and telling people what he thinks they want to hear, is a hallmark of high dominance messaging. His effort to sway Californians to his way of thinking on redistricting and calling a referendum is an extremely high-risk venture for him personally. If this doesn't pass, he's not going to look too good. But risk-taking is a signature characteristic of the high dominance leader, Tim, and he's doing it here. His story about immigration isn't hedged by qualifiers, and he's wrapping it in the flag rather than just in the Democrats' usual sob stories about humanitarian obligation. In fact, Newsom has begun to tell the most unapologetic, star-spangled story of immigrants' vital place in the nation we have heard from a major Democratic leader since Lyndon Johnson. This is the kind of high dominance, patriotism leadership that can win. His story is still inchoate, it's not very well developed yet. It's mostly about California rather than about the country, but I can see he's on his way. To develop and round out his narrative, he would also be wise to include a bold defense of economic freedom, which is the third pillar of Americanism. This is a big part of what makes our country matchlessly rich and uniquely prosperous in the world. Trump is aiming to trade in our market economy for Putin-style crony capitalism. And his tariffs are a grave threat to America's prosperity and leadership of the international economic order. Democrats could drive home that tariffs not only harm all Americans as consumers by raising prices, but the vast majority of us as producers by costing far, far more jobs than they protect. And tariffs aren't just ruinous from the standpoint of personal material interests. They also undermine America's global economic credibility, our leadership, our preeminence, and our power. As such, they threaten to make this century a Chinese-led rather than an American-led century. In fact, the nationalist argument against protectionism is at least as strong as the pocketbook one. When I was doing research for Comeback, what I found was that farmers whose incomes are taking a huge hit due to Trump's tariffs, this is going back to his first term, still support not only him, but his tariffs. And the Biden administration's liaison with the farm community was going around to conferences and saying things like, well, how can you people support, policies that are run against your own interests? Well, what's wrong with you? So it's socialism if the other guy gets the subsidies and it's okay if you do? That's the way to farmers' hearts, right? Call them, socialists, sponges on the state who aren't any too bright either. That's what Biden did. If you talk to these people, they think they're taking a hit for Team America by abiding the effects of Trump's tariffs. They vote against their own economic interests as patriots because Trump tells them China's taking advantage of us, and they believe him. So they support his policies. If you make over the median family income in this country, if your family makes over that income, and you're voting for Democrats, you're voting against your own interests. They're voting against their own interests too, economic interests. We vote against our interests because we think we want to live in a country where our values are held dear by those who govern us. They're doing the same thing. Why should we assume that they're driven by white nationalism? It might be true for some, but certainly not for most. As long as we think that way, we're going to treat them that way, they're going to get the vibe. So if Democrats devised and deployed a truthful, trenchant case against Trump's tariffs that effectively appeals to our patriotic passions and our pocketbook interests? I've heard it. Have you? While many Democrats have opposed Trump's tariffs, few, if any, major figures have offered anything like a coherent, unapologetic case against them. On the contrary, Democratic leaders are playing we-too politics, claiming that tariffs can be fine, but that Trump is just imposing them in the wrong way. We've gotten this from Elizabeth Warren. We've gotten this from Gretchen Whitmer. They mouth this mendacious piety, with the favorite line of theirs being that tariffs need to be applied with a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. These Democrats are essentially telling voters that Trump has the guts to do things that they lack the political will to do. Any leader with a passing knowledge of economics knows that protectionism, even if applied with a scalpel, is a dead end. All protectionism all the time, at least for an advanced industrialized country like the United States. And even the polls that so many Democratic politicians worship showed that it's time to grow a spine, tell the truth, and reap the political benefits. For months, surveys have shown that almost 2/3 of Americans disapprove of Trump's tariffs. Yet, as Jonathan Chait noted the moment Trump's tariffs were kicking in April, and I quote him, "As the American public was screaming, 'Please God, no,' the Democrats were whispering, 'Yes, but.'" Now, Newsom has spoken against Trump's tariffs, not least since California stands to lose so much by them. We are a trading state, more than any other state in the country. But it would be great to see him now develop a full-blown argument that can be part of a larger, patriotic, national democratic story. Economic freedom, that third pillar of Americanism, should be treated as such by Democrats. Economic freedom, of course, does not preclude having a robust welfare state. In fact, we as Democrats think that it should have one. It does not imply the kind of market fundamentalism of Ronald Reagan, although frankly, market fundamentalism really beats the hell out of Trump-style crony capitalism. And we need to be mindful of the fact that while people like Bernie Sanders and Zoran Mandani will vaunt socialism, socialism is not something that most Americans find very appealing. In rhetorical terms, placing our economic aspirations in a freedom frame, which smacks of enterprise and innovation and the American way, rather than a socialist frame, which is all about redistribution, will resonate much more broadly. Newsom, all the more since he basically kind of, embraces what's being called now an abundance agenda, and he sees that America's innovation advantage is our country's ace in the hole. He could be a guy who could popularize progressive economic agenda by integrating it into a national democratic story that's about much more than just raising taxes on the rich and throwing yet another still drippier pity party for purportedly struggling working families. A complete national democratic story that can overmatch Trump's narrative also needs to include defense. National defense, which is the fourth pillar of Americanism. Ferocious defense of our country and our allies against the predations of foreign dictatorships. We Democrats have not even begun to take political advantage of Trump's treasonous effort to trade in our country's status as the guardian of the free world in favor of status as a junior partner in Vladimir Putin's autocracy international. Low dominance Democrats fret over polls. They take issue polls. Low dominance Democrats love issue polls. Whatever the issues of the week are, issues such as abortion, the economy, foreign policy, whatever. They look at those issue polls and they see, oh, foreign policy isn't at the top of that, so we're not going to talk about foreign policy, right? That's the ultimate low dominance move. First of all, people don't vote on the issues. And second of all, what we want to do is remake their opinion. Trump has made trans athletes and pronouns national issues. He's made them. He's completely remade members of his own party's attitudes on everything from trade to Ukraine. We should have learned our lesson, which is that using inane issue polls to determine our messaging is a dead end, and the strong leaders aim to make opinion rather than just taking it. Trump gets this, we often haven't. I don't hear Newsom speaking on Trump's treasonous approach to the world or articulating his own vision of America's role in the world. If he were to do so, or if any Democrat wants to do so, she ideally would draw heavily on the visions and rhetoric of leaders like Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy. In that event, if Newsom were to do this, or any other Democratic leader, he or she could present the full package of a truly compelling, flag-seizing national Democratic story. I'm looking forward to seeing what Newsom comes up with. If you're listening, Governor, sign me up. I'd love to give you a hand with writing these. No current-day progressive grasps the importance of a national Democratic story and patriotism like Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland. Like MLK, he tells a story of America overcoming past injustice while challenging us to overcome current injustices. He doesn't just focus on how bad things are. He tells a story about how bad things were and how great they became with us all working together, and then he spells out the challenges that we still face and calls us to a glorious future. This is exactly what MLK did in his speeches. You hear this in Moore's speeches as well. He also peppers his speeches with inspiring tales of his own grandparents' abiding faith in America, despite their harsh encounters with racism. Central to Moore's patriotism, if you followed him, you'll know it, is the notion of service. He says, and I quote him, "Patriotism is the responsibility of a lifetime." And he defines patriots as, get this, people who are ready to sacrifice their today for a better tomorrow for others. When was the last time you heard any Democrat or any political leader call for any sacrifice from anybody on their own team? Ever heard it?
Just John Kennedy.
John Kennedy, Bill Clinton, JFK, FDR. What Moore is doing is he's trying to actually revive that tradition, which used to pervade the Democrats' ethos. From FDR's National Recovery Act, National Recovery Administration, JFK's Peace Corps, to Bill Clinton's America Corps. Is it any wonder that Americans have become more cynical about our political leaders and even democracy itself when the leaders treat us as pure egotists, whose support is to be won solely by promises to exact sacrifice from others? And the Republicans' messaging, those others who are to do the sacrificing, are of course those purportedly indolent sponges who live off of government welfare. In our Democrats' messaging, they're undertaxed billionaires. In both parties' messages, there's no need for us to give up a thing. All sacrifice will be borne by others. This is why we have a $37 trillion deficit, and our kids are in deep trouble economically. We spend $1.37 for every dollar we're willing to pay in taxes. That's a result of this mentality. But Moore seems to sense that many Americans are ready and restless for something better. He knows that sacrificing for others makes us feel good about ourselves, better than just receiving benefits or tax cuts, and that leaders who elicit sacrifice can inspire more enthusiasm and loyalty than those who just promise us more stuff. Beyond that, he grasps that being known as the party of sacrifice for country is the most promising way for us Democrats to seize the flag. And with that flag in hand, our party can start winning again. Let me wrap up there. We have plenty of time for discussion. So let me just, thanks for your attention. I know this has been a very long address, but and if you would, when you ask questions, just identify yourself. Just by your first name, at least.
Testing. Anybody have questions?
Kevin here. So why did a Christian nationalist vote for Trump?
Why
do Christian nationalists vote for Trump?
Religious nationalists, those are people who regard their own religion as superior to the religions of others, are always going to vote for the right-wing populists. We see this all over the world. So Hindu nationalists in India vote for Modi. This is very predictable. Real Christians actually don't vote for Trump. And real Christians can't be Christian nationalists. They can be American nationalists, as long as they're inclusive, right? They can be American patriots, but they can't be. The idea of a MAGA Christian is a contradiction in terms.
It is.
It doesn't exist.
That's right.
Christian nationalists are not Christians.
Hi, my name's Tom. I'm a retired military, 20 years. No, that's okay. So thanks for paying your taxes, because I used and abused them. So the thing is,
You were cheap labor, Tom. What are you talking about? All military personnel are very cheap labor.
so the vast majority of my peers, and even I until 2016, Republicans. Democrats fail to embrace our ethos. I don't know why. All my friends who are retired like me are GOP. A lot of them are MAGA. I like them. They're smart. We all went to college. We served our country. They're MAGA. So everybody in this room goes, wow, they're just whacked out weirdos. But the Democrats have failed, in my opinion, have failed to embrace, even though we're only like 0.5% of America, failed to embrace that. So we don't deserve anything special. It's just something that I have felt. My name's Tom, and
I support this message.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks for your service. And people who serve the country in the military tend to respect strength and fortitude in leaders. They just do. I mean, you need that if you're going to war. Yeah. And they also respect patriotism. And if the Democrats are too squeamish about patriotism, to say that this is the last greatest hope for humankind on earth, because we don't want to speak invidiously of other countries, or haven't we been a racist nation, you're not going to bring around most people who serve the country in the armed forces. The Democrats just have to have the guts to go ahead and say it. All strong leaders call their country the greatest place on earth. The leaders, President of Slovakia says that about Slovakia. There's nothing illiberal about doing it. Democrats have become so squeamish about nationalism that we won't even utter phrases like that. Rather than telling glorious stories of overcoming past injustice like MLK did, and then spelling out some kind of great program for the future, too many times progressives just get down in this narrative about America being a racist country. But America isn't a racist country. Authors of the MAGA Christian national narrative oftentimes are. America isn't failing to deal with poverty. The Republicans block every measure we want to take to do it. America isn't enthralled with guns. Our gun violence is not because Americans love their guns so much. It's because the Republicans scotch every possible gun control measure. Americans aren't thirsting for authoritarianism. Trump and his MAGA people are. Those are the traitors. Those aren't America. They're the bottom moral quarter of the country. And even a lot of those people can be brought around, because a lot of these people are actually certainly that top moral half of Trump supporters. They're not bad people. They're just not. They just have found that the liberals offer very little that they can identify with. And they feel like liberal elites are constantly looking down on them. I think that's a big part of the problem. Thanks for your question.
My name is Janie. I have a question for you. You talked about democracy being the first pillar of Americanism. So could you comment on the MAGA concept that our country is not a democracy, but it is a republic, which, I hear frequently from MAGA people?
Okay, so it's a republic, meaning that we elect leaders to represent us. We don't do it directly. That's true of every modern democracy. We don't, if you're living in some little tiny city state in Greece with maybe 5,000 people, then you can have, democracy. But, so we're a republic, but, we've been a democracy that is a republic. Republics can be democracies. And so, this idea, we're a republic, not a democracy, so let's destroy democracy, which is basically what MAGA's trying to do, is the most bizarre kind of thing I can possibly imagine. All modern democracies are republics. Then we can say, okay, then you're destroying the republic as opposed to democracy. That's fair enough.
Hi, my name's Joanne, and I'm wondering if you think that Kamala Harris's political career is dead, or could she make a comeback?
I hope it's dead. I hope it's dead. She should not try to make a political comeback. She blew it. This could cost us her democracy. She showed she doesn't have the right stuff. First it looked like she did. She did not. And we hear about her, she's going to spend the next 3 years on a listening tour of southern states and then come back as a Democratic presidential candidate in 2028. Are you kidding? She had her chance. I think she's a great person. She devoted her whole life to public service. She seems like a compassionate person. Really the kind of person we all want to have as a friend. She is not presidential timber. She already gave it a shot. She couldn't do it. Time for her to move off stage. Yes, please.
I'm Barbara. My question is though, about her, so if she had the presidential fiber to her, I'm just using that word, she would have stood up to the operatives and said, no,
Absolutely.
I'm gonna stick with what I've been doing
Absolutely.
for
She
the
would have ignored them.
Okay.
Trump's operatives are always telling him to rein it in.
Okay.
In this election, they said, please stick with the economy. Everybody thinks the economy is better under you. Don't the immigration thing, like 10% of Americans support you on that. Trump said, fuck that. I know what I like to talk about, And so this enhanced his reputation as this high dominance leader. He knew that was the key. So he ignores his own operatives all the time. Good. Also, she shouldn't have just taken Biden's people, which is what she did. They already ran Biden's campaign into the ground. She could have brought in her own people. The fact that she turned the campaign over to these folks was sign enough that she wasn't ready for prime time.
Okay. I have another thing just tied to that with regard to Gavin Newsom, because I really do like what he's doing. What do you suggest as me as one individual or even a group like this, and if enough people are in agreement with what you're pointing out, to influence him or to reach him?
Every time he does what I'm calling a high dominance thing, send out a message to his campaign, to his office, share it, and call the governor's office and say, I like this.
Okay.
You keep this up, I'm going to support you for president. You keep this up, I'm feeling better because of what I heard the governor say today, right? Keep reinforcing it, and not just with him, with any leader who's doing what we think is the kind of thing that's going to help us win again. They actually do take those calls seriously.
Okay.
It's interesting. They tend to staff tally them up and stuff. Yes, please.
So how do we as a country go forward with people like Miller and Vogt?
Oh, yeah.
How do we go with people like Stephen Miller?
Yeah, how do
And
we
Vogt.
counteract, they seem very, very dangerous to me.
The Project 2025.
Oh, right.
But particularly those two people just seem very dangerous to me. So what's gonna happen where they're concerned? How are we as a country going to battle that?
Well, not enough Democrats are actually taking this on. One thing Newsom's doing, unlike most other Democrats, is he's saying, not just the democracy's in danger. He's spelling out in these little video shorts every day now, here's what they're gonna do. We see them trying to gerrymander Texas. That's just the beginning. They're also going to have people they're going to try to intimidate voters at polling stations. Here's what it's going to look like. They're going to have ICE agents at polling stations. He's spelling out exactly what and it's hard to listen to because, wow, this is really awful. But he's saying it. And he's spelling out why doing things like getting rid of the auditors and the inspectors general in these government agencies is really awful for corruption, how that's going to cost us. So following leaders like that, reinforcing it, telling these stories to our friends, including Republican voters, and challenging them, these are things that we can do. And we can also really promote candidates who take democracy seriously and put it first. there's this very cynical group of Democratic operatives who think that Americans don't give a damn about democracy. All they care about is issues that affect their real lives. That's the whole kitchen table Democrat. All Americans care about is, James Carville and Rahm Emanuel think what everybody does before every election is they sit down to the kitchen table with a pencil and a pen in hand, and they get their calculators out, and they figure which party, which candidate is going to be better for our income next year. And then they vote that way. It's absolute nonsense. Nobody does that. That's pure cynicism. We don't need their advice. We don't need candidates like them. In fact, this kind of repeal agenda, like we're just going to repeal the Trump's big beautiful bill, and a piece by piece, and go back to what we did before that, is a total turkey. And now that's going to become the low-down, this alternative to the kind of thing Newsom is doing going into the midterms. We should just focus on kitchen table issues. The problem is, if people do the calculations on the effect of Trump's big beautiful bill on their incomes, most people actually gain from it. Certainly the top 3/4 of earners gain from that bill. The problem is, of course, it's all a ruse. It's all hot checks, right? All these tax breaks are just financed with government debt, so they're horrible for the country. But if people do what Carville assumes they always do, which is just go home and calculate the effect on themselves, repealing the big beautiful bill is not going to win the election. And yes, people will care about democracy if you can frame the crisis in the right way, and I do see Newsom starting to do that.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So, given that, how do you counterbalance? What would you suggest Newsom does in relation to the income inequality, that issue particularly?
Well, I mean, pursuing progressive economic program is something that I think most Democrats should do. I don't think they should wrap it in the rhetoric of socialism. That's a turkey in the United States. And some are going to do it anyway, but I think Newsom should embrace this freedom frame, to get back to a point I made earlier. Newsom is basically an economic progressive, but he's a capitalist too. He's a pro-growth progressive. And the fact is, all this talk about redistribution is fine, but it works if you've got a growing pie. Bill Clinton knew that, right? Bill Clinton put economic growth first, and what he was able to do was, first of all, eliminate government budget deficits. Second of all, produce the largest rise in median family income that we've seen in the United States since the 1960s. And Reaganisms, like Philip, to raising income inequality. Income inequality quit growing under Bill Clinton. And his rhetoric was so centrist, and it was so back to work, and everybody's going to work now, and ending welfare as we know it, that people on the far left were actually duped by this. They thought Clinton was like some neoliberal, like enemy of the working class. Well, he's the only president since FDR who won the white working class twice. And Lyndon Johnson won it once. Other than that, the Republicans have always won it with his supposed neoliberalism, right? And his embrace of globalization. Swing states didn't swing when Clinton ran. He won the votes of everybody but white male millionaires, basically. And of course, black people love Clinton. So, that kind of message, his way of talking about the economy, I think is really smart. And I hope Newsom kind of gets that. His abundance agenda is essentially a pro-growth message. And I do think that obviously, not obvious to everybody perhaps, but to me, that California and much of our economy is grossly overregulated in certain ways. What passes as environmental protection laws are not environmental protection laws in the state. So, at any rate, I think embracing that agenda is a good idea.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
My name is Ed, and what I'd like to ask you is about tariffs. I remember that there was this tariff game during the Great Depression, and it just compounded, everybody raising tariffs compounded the Depression. Can you comment on this?
Yeah.
This is Donnie's great vision of the United States.
Yeah, exactly. Ed says, look at tariffs during the Great Depression. This is Donnie's vision for the United States. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Tariffs always produce the same outcome. Beggar thy neighbor policies. They end up being bad for everybody. They're a total ruse. They're a lie. They never work. For an advanced industrialized country that's competitive in the global system to impose tariffs never makes any sense, and the Democrats are not making a case against it. There are times when a kind of protectionism can be called for if it's about strategic advantage. So for example, Biden's Chips and Science Act had these kind of non-tariff barriers against some Chinese exports, and they were about national security, right? I'm not saying I'm against any kind of protectionism of any type under any circumstances, but for the most part, tariffs are always awful, and you don't hear the Democrats saying that and making a strong case. This is a political winner for us if we just do it. Democrats are scared to death of just that some guy in Gary, Indiana still wants his dad's, his grandpa's steel mill job back. And so God forbid we stoke his anger at us. That's a completely dysfunctional way of approaching this problem. Yes, please.
Hi, my name's David. So really appreciate your presentation. I like a lot of what you have to say. I want to push back on one thing. If it's really all about political messaging, right? Why did Hillary Clinton win the national popular vote by 7 million votes, right? I mean, she did, her messaging seemed to work, at least on a sort of a national scale, right?
Well, I mean, the fact that she lost the Electoral College and she only won the popular vote by 2%, I think is the problem. Remember Donald Trump in 2016? That guy should have never gotten within 20 million votes, or 20 percentage points to the White House. If he could do that well against you, you were off your game. Really off your game. Hillary Clinton is not a weak person, as we all know, right? But she was a very low dominance messenger. She was constantly shifting her opinion in response to public opinion polling. She was always militantly pre-trade, except when she was running for president. She opposed trade deals that she had authored, right? Because some polling told her that people didn't like them. She was, instead of making it about herself and really taking it to Trump, she was always calling everybody to be overcome by the vapors with her and all the insulting things Trump was saying. She was a very low dominance candidate. Now, as you point out, she still won the popular vote. That's because Trump was so goddamn weak. This is the weakest candidate for the presidency we've ever had in our country's history. How off your game do you have to be to lose to this guy? So, appreciate your question. Yes, please.
About political operatives, it seems to me they have a lot of responsibility in terms of misguiding their candidates. They're supposed to help them to win. So your research clearly indicates that they should have paid attention to that. Or is your research so recent that their polling told them something different? How do you adequately, use polls and at the same time research like yours to help direct a candidate to victory? You're also implying that a strong enough candidate that is high dominance will follow his own, sort of intuition and send the heck with it to the operatives, but that shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, for sure. So, first of all, Democratic Party operatives think that the raison d'etre, the reason for our parties is fundraising. How many, you get this text?
Okay.
Okay. They're all these damsels in distress texts,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Without your $15, we're dead,
Right.
That's the way to rouse us, right? That really gets me excited. What's more, they're scams. They're total scams. The 400% match? 400% match? It doesn't exist. It's a lie. 98.6 cents that you send to Citizens United out of every dollar goes to make a handful of people rich and pay their staff. This is a scam. Very little of the money you give to any of these organizations gets to a good cause. They just feed the operatives themselves. Total scam. This is being blown open by a Stanford political scientist now named Adam Boddicker. I don't know if you've heard of him. He had a couple of pieces recently. He's getting to the FEC data. What he's finding is that money is not getting to the sources that it's supposed to be getting to. It's a total scam. And so first of all, fire the thieving panhandlers. Stop the messages. They're just demoralizing me. There have been moments when I thought, I'm going to write back, you can't do it, and say one more, I'm going to vote for the Republicans, right? I'm going to support the Republicans. That wouldn't be very credible. And and I put stop in, I just get a slew of other messages. Like stop means there's somebody there, so they just sell it to somebody else. And it's all a scam, it's bullshit. Now if I got texts, occasionally at least, telling me about the next demonstration in the town I'm in, being held by some great Democratic politician without requests for funds and without a link to something that asks for money, that's fine. But that's not what we get. And what irritates me the most of all is this kind of boldness for bucks. So Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, goes to Ukraine and does this really cool thing where he really calls Trump out on his treasonous policy in Ukraine, and an hour later I get a text from him asking me for money. See how bold I was? Pay up. That is totally demoralizing.
Yeah.
Money does not decide national elections. We raised twice as much money as the Republicans in 2020 and 2024. We won in 2020, 2024, twice as much money. They got what they wanted, which is the map turned red, and we got what we want. We outraised them in terms of funding. So fire the panhandlers now. Get rid of them. Seriously, we could do without this money for a while. Can you imagine how invigorating that would be?
Yeah.
Mom Downey, the best moment in his campaign for New York mayor is he said, this hilarious ad, did you see the video? Where he begged voters to stop sending money. He said, I got enough, I don't need this. Take to the streets and tell your friends about our campaign. Don't send me any more money. So the fundraising thing is a big problem with the mentality of the operators. They just think it's all about fundraising. They also think it's all about issue positioning. Look, most operatives in the Democratic Party are very educated people, very progressive people. They were raised on the coasts. They don't have much contact with ordinary folks, certainly not with working class folks. And they are abiding by these same nostrums that they have for an awful long time. They're simply misguided. And Harris's campaign is exhibit A of that. So, I'd like to fire all the pollsters and the panhandlers and the panderers right now. Let's get rid of them. We can do without them. They're just a drag. Can be done. Yes, please. Sorry. Please.
My name is Chad.
Chad.
I recently read an article in Bowler, which was a republication from usually the Political ProPublica, that talked about, similar to what you're talking about, you're after the aspect of what we do about it, which is strong leadership, authoritarian-like leaders. This article was realizing in studies and polls that have been taken that by and large, most Americans, many, not most, but many Americans prefer a strong leader, an authoritarian approach. So what I feel like you're saying, here's how to do it. And it's not because we want authoritarianism, but we do want to win. And in order to win, if a lot of people just want to have somebody take care of business, that's what a strong leader gives you a sense of. Then you can still do all the things you want to do, just say it with authority, it feels like to me. So did your studies show that really what it is that people prefer somebody to take care of business?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. And the answer is absolutely yes. And everybody, everywhere, we want people to take care of business. We don't want people to just follow the rules. We're so good at following the rules and honoring norms. We need people actually, are indomitable doers of great deeds. That's what everybody wants, liberals and conservatives alike. But the difference between us and the Trumpians is we're not authoritarian. Our leaders should be authoritative. They should get things done, but always in the democratic framework, which means that we never, ever try to challenge the fairness of elections that we lost. We always honor the rules of every election. We never try to rig one. That's a Democrat. You can do that and then be tough as nails between elections, and there's nothing authoritarian about that. Authoritarianism is what Trump is trying to do, which is tilt the playing field, move against the media, it's move against the Constitution. That's authoritarianism. So as long as we don't do that, then we are still good Democrats. And remember, we're not trying to be like Trump. Dominance can be liberal, it can be conservative, it can be used for good, it can be used for bad. It does mean fighting fire with fire. It does mean acknowledging that politics is a blood sport, and absolutely always an us versus them game. You know, if this was Bob Dole versus Bill Clinton, you know, we could afford to be a little bit nicer, but we just can't. We're not in those times. And the problem with playing nice with these monsters is that democracy itself sees its reputation decline. Democrats and democracy become associated in the public mind with weakness.
Yeah.
And authoritarianism itself. I saw this in Russia when I was studying Russia for many years, and Putin's rise. Authoritarianism becomes associated with strength, with getting things done. You can't compromise the reputation of Democrats and authoritarians by failing to stand up to the authoritarians. Yes, please.
How do we ever respect the Supreme Court again?
It's hard to respect the Supreme Court. We just have to win the next 3 or 4 presidential elections in succession. Sorry guys, that's the right answer. That's the only answer. We can't like expand. I've got friends who want to expand the court. Let's 100 members of the court. Who's going to expand the court? We heard a lot of that before. It's nonsense. We just need to keep winning presidential elections, winning control of the Senate, and then as these turkeys die off, we can actually bring in our own people.
Thank you for your presentation, and it was very educational and enlightening. I guess I look at what can we do? What's a near term and a near target? And I guess one of the things I think about are the various congressional districts that currently have Republicans in the Congress in California. It seems like they should be a target that we should work on from the standpoint of voting to reduce Medicaid and many other aspects that are not in their interest, and yet their representatives have voted for. Are those good targets?
Should be targets. And what we need is high dominance, flag-waving Democrats to challenge those people in those purple districts. So we should promote candidates like that. We should get behind them. And then once whoever's nominated, we should really support them to the hilt. I did that with several candidates.
How do I support them? Do I write postcards? Do I send them money?
Write postcards, you go door to door for them, you can send them money. Make sure you don't send them the money to one of these groups that that I just talked about. You can send it directly to their campaign, for sure. And you can call their office and tell them what a great job they're doing, and you can tell all your neighbors and all your friends why they're so great, and not just try to educate them in their own interests. The folks have had it up to here with us trying to educate them in their own interests, right? They know what the deal is. They know that Trump is reducing Medicaid. We want to keep it at a higher level. They already know that. Most Americans don't rely on the government for their health care. They get it through their employers.
Leader that's going to stand up for it.
What's that?
Strong leader that's going to stand
Right.
up.
And so we need the leaders who it's easy to present as such, right? We need leaders who nobody can own. And that is not about, the leaders who express still another squishier, pledge of sympathy for those straightened working class voters. That is so condescending. Where I come from, back in Louisville, Kentucky, and just talking to folks around here, they hate that talk. They hate that talk. And, working class Americans, like everybody else, like maybe even more than people in other countries, they don't like the idea of being dependent on government services. So if you just tell them, don't you understand how dependent you are on government services? And if you still not smart enough to understand, how much you need our health care program, just wait till you get old and infirm and the Republicans won't cover your pre-existing conditions. What does that sound like in the ears of most ordinary people? That message has been a turkey. It helps explain why 60% of working class Americans vote Republican consistently now. Yes, please.
Many of us are going to be going out canvassing and perhaps trying to convince people to get on the board to go out canvassing. What should be our message when we go out door to door and talk to people about supporting high dominance candidates, or even middle dominance?
That would be an improvement.
What should we be saying?
Look, I think get people excited about the party. The Republicans are always trying to excite people about the party, and they know that party affiliation and party loyalty is the best predictor of voting, better than race, better than anything else. Democrats have no notion of party. We're embarrassed about the party. Elephants are everywhere in Republican households. You ever notice this? They carry bags with elephants on them. We're afraid to even put the donkey on anything. Oh my God, we're above partisanship. Fuck that. We are not above partisanship. We shouldn't be above partisanship. Glorify the party, but we are the party of not the working class's economic interests, not avoiding Medicaid cuts. They know it. They know it. They've already heard that before, right? We're the party of America. We're the party of standing up to Putin. We're the party of, and don't talk about class anything, middle class, working class. It just doesn't, those categories don't mean anything to Americans. They don't matter. We're the party of America. We're the party of a great America. Yes, we believe in immigration because it makes America so great. Yes, we believe in economic freedom, and here's our way of economic freedom. Get people excited about sacrifice, too, for country. What you can do for country. Our policy of just telling everybody, you don't have to sacrifice a thing. We're just going to tax the rich at a higher rate. You know, most Americans don't find that all that compelling, frankly. So I think we need to change the narrative about who we are as a party. Okay? And exuberance and optimism always works. It's so hard to be exuberant and optimistic as a Democrat these days, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's so hard. But just like Keith smiling, you have to feel it. Just keep doing it.
We have time
Yes.
for one or two more
I think this lady
questions.
back here's had her hand up for a while.
Hi, my name's Angela, and I'm originally from Kansas, 21 years back there, but in a Democratic northeastern part of the state. So I was raised pretty much Democrat. I've been out to California 50 years. I voted for Newsom. You seem really high on him. But do you really think in the Midwest and back there, do you think with his $500 haircuts and his Hollywood appearance and his French laundry during COVID and how he's in bed with PG&E and how he hasn't taken care of our homeless situation, can he really be that formidable again?
Possibly, but everything you raise is a huge problem for him. Huge problem.
People in the Midwest, let me tell you, he doesn't.
Oh, it's so true. Look, the guy refused to fund Prop 36, which recriminalizes, at least on the third offense, theft. This decriminalization of crime has got to stop in this state. It is an absolute disaster for us as citizens, and certainly for our candidates' political prospects. 68% of us voted to recriminalize retail theft, which is just a common sense vote. Newsom refused to fund it. Mass incarceration isn't the answer. We have a mass incarceration problem because we have a massive crime problem in this country. You cannot take decarceration. It's absolutely true. And you cannot take decarceration. What's that?
Violent crime is that just, where do the numbers come from? Because those are not the numbers that I heard.
I said we have a mass incarceration problem because we have a massive crime problem. Our murder rate is 15 times higher than that in European countries. The liberals are always saying crime is plummeting. We always say it, just the way the conservatives always say that crime is escalating. You ever notice that? The truth is, if you look at the numbers, it's a mixed picture. But overall, our crime rates are astronomical, including our violent crime rates. Not funding Prop 36. 68% of us in liberal California voted for is a turkey. You also make the $500 haircuts. If I were Newsom, dude, I would get a scar on my face and a bad haircut. That guy is too pretty. He is too pretty. This is what Kennedy looked like.
And people in the Midwest and other areas, they think, they think we're on lists in California anyway.
But the thing is that if he keeps doing what he's doing right now, this is the kind of thing that folks in Kansas, and where I'm from in Kentucky, respect. That kind of boss is somebody who I think he could get over all these liabilities you're talking about, if he in fact pursued this kind of message. Yes, they are liabilities, there's no doubt about it. But right now, if he keeps this up, I think he could overcome it. And look, it's not about Newsom's future anyway. It's about learning what a high dominance Democrat looks like. He is actually showing us how to do that. That's actually the point.
Last question, Professor.
Sure.
Okay,
please.
I was wondering, what do you think the Democrats could learn from leaders like Zelensky when it comes to that idea of self-sacrifice?
Whew, great question.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, what can we learn from Zelensky? What can Democrats learn from Zelensky, and she notes especially about his spirit of sacrifice? So, Zelensky has united a nation, a multi-ethnic nation, in a time of war in a way that very few leaders could have done. He is super inclusive with his nationalism, which helped, because there are a lot of predominantly Russian-speaking, like ethnic Russians in the East, but most are loyal Ukrainians, and part of it is his whole kind of national democratic story. It's very inclusive. He calls for sacrifice. That is absolutely inspiring. And he calls for courage, and he demonstrates courage every day. It's all about courage, ultimately. What I'm talking about is taking risks, defying polls if necessary, to telling the truth. That all requires courage. Zelensky almost had this forced upon him. But without a leader of his quality, we don't know whatever would have actually happened to Ukraine. In some sense, we need our own Zelensky, don't we? We need somebody with that kind of temerity, that kind of moxie, that kind of spirit of sacrifice, call to sacrifice, and that kind of courage. Now, I don't know if we're going to ever get Zelensky, right? But if we could get kind of halfway to Zelensky, we'd be doing very well for ourselves. He is a great model for us, though. Actually, I'm planning on doing an analysis of his speeches to try to see what this kind of high dominance leadership looks like in another country. So I really appreciate that question. Are we out of time?
Thank you, Professor Fish, for a terrific talk. I'm wondering, are you going to run for office? Are you going to run for office?
I can run for office? If you guys support me, I will.